Mr. Speaker, we as legislators to ensure that we also put laws in place, mechanisms in place that ensures that once they get into the industry, they have an opportunity to grow. Once they get into the industry, they have an opportunity, if they happen to get an accident, to access not only good medical facilities, but to ensure that they are not maimed for life. Mr. Speaker, this cannot be done without us having to put in place good laws, but most importantly, also good civic education so that our riders and their passengers will be safe. In other countries, Mr. Speaker, and most of the Western countries, we know public transport is managed by the government and by the local governments. In this country, Mr. Speaker, the transportation sector has been solely left in the hands of the private sector. We have been a bit slow and dragging our legs in formulating laws that will regulate. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, it is important today that we start looking at these issues and addressing the possible loopholes and gaps that have been left. And one of them, Mr. Speaker, is to come up with a good law that will ensure that our insurances, Mr. Speaker, they'll take care of the victims who happen to get accidents. Mr. Speaker, sir, if you happen to go to any public hospital, you will find there is a ward dedicated to these people who have sustained fractures because of sustaining injuries. Unlike a motor vehicle, Mr. Speaker, where somebody has a safety belt, in motorcycle you have no opportunity to put on a safety belt. Therefore, the exposure is high. We must therefore look at our insurance policies so that anybody who's involved in a border accident does not only get treatment, but they get accessible and affordable means of getting treated. As I sit down, Mr. Speaker, I would also want to urge my colleagues that we must also take our responsibility by conducting civic education so that the border riders in Kenya can emulate the border riders in Luanda, who only carry one passenger, and that is with a helmet and a reflective jacket. If we do that, Mr. Speaker, we'll go a long way to ensuring that we minimize the number of accidents. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, we know that most of these riders, they come from school, they are trained for 2 days to ride, and then they take on carrying passengers. Mr. Speaker, it is the high time we also come up with a mechanism to ensure that we have safe and standardized training procedure so that they know the secure and they also know the better road use so that we can afford some of these accidents. Mr. Speaker, sir, I support.
Senator Maanzo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to speak into this very important law. Mr. Speaker, the Traffic Act has not been sufficient, bearing in mind that it's a very old act from the colonial days. And in the Kibaki administration, motorcycle transport became very huge. Long time ago, motorcycles used to be owned by a few individuals, but now it became part of public transport, and therefore it was a big development. And although there could be made regulations under that Traffic Act, the Honorable Boni Alwale, in his wisdom, decided to come up with this law, which deals with the regulation of the motorcycle transport industry, and even goes on to devolve it. Now that Senate deals with the devolution, so that it can also be managed at the county's level. Mr. Speaker, a lot of motorcyclists do not have insurance. A lot of them do not even have a driving license, and a lot of them, Mr. Speaker, do not even have the gear which is necessary in case of an accident, Mr. Speaker. And again, when this culture came, Mr. Speaker, it went unregulated. Some drive opposite the road. And recently, Mr. Speaker, on my way to Makueni last week, I saw a very bad motorcycle accident. In fact, a matatu overtook and hit a motorcyclist very badly. And I stopped and quickly organized, because this was in Machakos County, through the deputy governor, and we were able to get, facilities for first aid quickly and an ambulance to save his life. And you could see the interaction between the normal motorist and the motorcyclist has not been well done. Mr. Speaker, we could even come up with pathways to be used by motorcyclists, and also the no more cycling, Mr. Speaker, which applies in many other countries. And the whole idea is to make sure that there is safety for the people being transported and for motorists themselves, Mr. Speaker. If you go to most accident wards, you will find most people have broken lips, broken skulls from motorcycle accident. The motorcyclist himself doesn't have insurance cover, and therefore compensation of such people becomes extremely difficult, Mr. Speaker. Then it goes on, Mr. Speaker, to come up, these particular regulations comes up with a board which will manage and time to time follow up the activities of motorcycling, Mr. Speaker. It has also become a very big industry in Kenya. People are doing assembling, manufacturing, and in that scenario, I've engaged a lot of young people into employment, either the cyclists themselves. Most of them, in fact, are graduates, university graduates, and do this motorcycling transport as they look for better jobs or as they wait for placement in normal businesses or in normal companies for work. So it has also provided big-time solutions. But, Mr. Speaker, motorcyclists have also been abused during the time of elections. I saw today that a politician had sponsored motorcyclists in Nairobi to do politics, and you could see, 3, 4, 5 people loaded on one motorbike, being driven recklessly, a lot of them following each other. There is every likelihood of an accident, Mr. Speaker. And unless this is regulated by the Halwale law, then we are likely to have more trouble, more useful people injured or maimed, and ending up being a bigger expense. So we want to support this law, and I hope it is going to be received very well in the counties. Counties have really supported motorists. Politicians have supported motorcyclists a lot, especially during the campaign time. They're usually very useful. In fact, where somebody doesn't know how to use a Google map, the best person to ask directions in an area is a motorcyclist. They're very familiar with that area. Sometimes they even lead people to your destinations at a little fee, and young people are able to earn a living. So I really want to support Mr. Speaker. I say that this is very important law. We need to have it enforced so that motorcyclists can have certain exceptions, can go through trainings. Their driving license does not need necessarily be the normal driving license, could have its own class, and then the issue of gear and the proper dressing because of the wind and even breathing systems. And a lot of them end up with the cough, or even chest problems, to make sure they are fully secured so that we can build our nation. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I second.
Senator Chirange.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. From the onset, I want to support the Public Transport Motorcycle Regulation Bill 2023 by saying it is timely. But, Mr. Speaker, before I make a few comments, allow me to thank my colleagues for standing with me when I lost my elder brother, Mwalimu Alex Meli, for the support, both compassionate and any form of support moral. My family and myself, we are grateful for the support that I got from my colleagues and the Secretariat, and I don't take it for granted. I will always be grateful. So, Speaker, allow me to say a few things on this bill. The issue of border. I can call it a necessary evil, or it is becoming part of us. I realized the importance of border, Mr. Speaker, when this house was invaded, because most of us decided to leave SUVs, and the significant way of escaping from this place was through a border. And people had to change and everything. Except a few people who are lucky to use other forms to escape the attack and invading of this parliament, Mr. Speaker. It is becoming so even in politics, I think my brother has said very well in politics.
when this house
we
was
use it
invaded,
to mobilize young people, to
because
show how
most of
powerful
us
you are,
decided to leave
to show how
SPVs.
popular you are.
And
So it's
the
part of us,
significant way of
socially,
escaping
economically.
from
Mr. Speaker, it has
this
also,
place
border has
was
made
through
ease
a
of
border.
transport
And people
more convenient from the village to the city. When you get stuck in traffic, Mr. Speaker, you icon a border and you are able to access your destination in good time. While the border economy has become very strategic and important to social economy of this country and social political, Mr. Speaker, it continues to be a very, also a source. When you go to Moi Teaching and Referral and even KNH and some of our hospitals in counties, Mr. Speaker, trauma centers and emergency centers will not go with 10 minutes or 2 minutes without a border accident victim, Mr. Speaker, being taken to the hospital. What we need to do, while the border sector is critical for the growth of the economy of this country, since the advent of President Mwai Kibaki, Mr. Speaker, we must also bring in certain decency and regulation and some form of decency within a specific in border sector, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I agree with Senator Boni that it is time to bring the border sector in order. And to be able, Mr. Speaker, you are aware, by the beginning of this year, 6 January, according to United Nations records, we have about 3 million borders across the country. So it shows you it is a critical sector that it cannot be ignored. While we agree there are challenges that could be here and there, we must support. Mr. Speaker, over 100% of people who work with border sector from villages to cities and towns are young people, Mr. Speaker, who largely depend as the way of earning their living, Mr. Speaker, both in terms of business growth and in terms of earning their daily wage, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, to me, this I thought, and I remember the last time it was being moved, I thought I should at least through the God grace, I should be able to contribute on this bill, because I find it myself as the leader and the senator of Nandi that we must find a way. Mr. Speaker, there are also challenges. While we agree border sector is important, we also have challenges where rogue criminals are now using border to create insecurity. Sometimes the borders have become accessories of criminals. Some borders, I'm not saying all, where people are being attacked. You remember in some of roads of this city, if you want to enjoy the breeze and the sun of the city, somebody, and you are operating on your phone or any phone, if your window is open, the easiest way for some of the criminals is to use border snatch, and then they drive off, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a critical sector, but we must bring order to the sector. You know, politicians, Mr. Speaker, we are the greatest consumers of border services, especially around political season and when you want to make a statement. So it has also aesthetic value in terms of politics of this country. Mr. Speaker, the only issue I would want to propose is that I saw in clause number 12 that the rider of a two-wheel motorcycle, we need to encourage, I don't know the place of tuk-tuk. I don't know, the mover and the owner of the bill should see where to put tuk-tuk, because it is three-legged and it is common in Mombasa. I just saw Senator Faki here. It is common in Mombasa, so how can we put together? So, Speaker, even the cart pushing, the one mkokoteni, it has two wheels. So I don't know, you need to be very precise, Senator Boni, in terms of, because I could be pushing mkokoteni, and you might demand, the police can stop me and say, where is your license of pushing this mkokoteni or cart pusher in terms of going? So I think, Mr. Speaker, we must, and then the tuk-tuk place somewhere, the tuk-tuk, so that, you know, most of short distances. This also a very critical sector, especially in places like Mombasa. And my sister, Senator Miraj, will tell you it's very critical in terms of moving in the economy of that city, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another issue that I wanted to say is that I agree Just like Matatu sector, Mr. Speaker, let us use SACCOs for enforcement of strict within the traffic department. Because if you are operating a border in CBD and we notice the number of that border being involved in criminal element, we can track the SACCO or the cooperative society. Mr. Speaker, those two things will happen. One, it will allow us to enforce decency and order within the sector. Number two, Mr. Speaker, it will also give us a chance to allow this cooperative society to build themselves to become economic powerhouse. Mr. Speaker, so that even when they are pursuing the loans interest, they want to build a capacity of border and many others, Mr. Speaker, it is very critical in terms of, so SACCO, savings and cooperative society will allow us the enforcement of traffic rules or follow-up of issues and then economic empowerment. Mr. Speaker, I don't know, since Kakamega is my neighborhood, before border came in, there was other border of using the bicycle. So the bicycle placement also should consider, because I realize in some areas there is still the bicycle that you use energy to push through. Because before border was introduced in Kenya, Mr. Speaker, many people used to use border, the one that is the normal bicycle, as opposed to motorcycle, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another issue that I wanted to mention in terms is the training of border. I agree that we need to train border, Mr. Speaker, to allow them to ensure that when we train them, Mr. Speaker, we ensure that they are compliant with the traffic rules. Because the sad reality, Mr. Speaker, especially in the village where some of us come from, apart from few who come from cities, Mr. Speaker, is you find somebody training in the morning to drive a border. By lunch, by 11 a.m., he is driving around. By 1 p.m., he is carrying passengers. And that is when we had most of the accidents. So the issue of licensing, I think the NTSA and other agencies within the transport sector should look at access. I don't know whether we'll use the normal BCE classes, the normal driving license that we have. I don't know whether we should issue, or when we introduce another class within the driving license, Mr. Speaker, to allow easy access of driving license for many young people. And I think CDF can play a critical role. I normally see members of National Assembly mobilizing border. Training, they should also train them to acquire driving license to ensure we are more safe when we are using border, Mr. Speaker, in terms of going into the future. The fourth point, Mr. Speaker, that I wanted to make is on the issue of employment contracts. I think what we can say should be compliant with the labor relations or labor laws, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the employment contracts, because I know people who use startups business, and we had startup bill, Mr. Speaker, we were able to, in the startups of businesses, we are able, there are many people in the village who start a small business, they buy a motorbike and then they hire a young man or a young lady within that region, and Mr. Speaker, they are able to be hired. I think what we can agree, Mr. Speaker, is let us, I've seen in clause number 14, where Senator Kalwala has indicated, is we can just say mutatis mutandis in terms of the Labor Relations Act and other employment should be used, so that we ensure, Mr. Speaker. And then also to prevent, sometimes you beat border riders who are below 18, driving borders in our centers. We should also be able to agree. And in fact, in training, Mr. Speaker, we also agree. In clause number 18, the County Transport and Safety Board, Mr. Speaker, one of the most harassed border, especially in Kapsabet, Nandi Hills, Mosoriot, Kabiet, the complaints I normally get is from the traffic police officers. The most harassed is the border. I don't know why, I've never understood. There is nowhere when you go in this region, the traffic police or the police are in good terms with the border sector. But I think with the County Transport and Safety Board, we should involve and ensure they are being trained, civic education is being carried, so that they are not being also exploited. But also, as the border sector demands that they should be respected and not harassed by the police, we also, Mr. Speaker, they must also be compliant in terms of driving license, as my brother has indicated here, In terms of compliance, Mr. Speaker, sometimes you drive. Most of us are drivers. And sometimes you drive at middle of the night, and before you know it, you brake, you just notice there is a motorcycle ahead of you. And it does not have reflection, they don't have a reflector jackets, there is no helmet, there is no reflector lights or the parking lights, they don't have headlights, Mr. Speaker, and that's what has caused accidents in our roads. And you know, sometimes it's out of ignorance because, and I know maybe Nairobi does not have such, but when you go to somewhere we come from, you just encounter border on the middle of the road, and fatalities might occur, Mr. Speaker. So this county transport and safety is that the compliance of border is before they must be approved to use the road. For example, they should have proper working headlights, indicators, ensure the engine is functioning, the tires are well maintained, Mr. Speaker, they have reflector jackets, and I'm happy the law has specified that you must have 2 helmets and must have 2 reflector jackets. When you go to Rwanda, Mr. Speaker, you will notice those things have been compliant. I have never known in this country, Mr. Speaker, whether we go for quality or quantity. Because the border rider, Mr. Speaker, I don't know whether when you carry more passengers, is it better than complying with the 2 or you earn more? Because I don't know, is it quantity or quality? Because you get, especially the people taking children to school, they are carrying almost 6 children using one border, Mr. Speaker. Yet the law is very clear that apart from the rider, you have 2 helmets, 1 for the rider, 1 for the passenger, 1 reflector for the rider, and 1 for the passenger you are carrying. I can bet on you, if we were to go to the entire country, you will get very few borders who wear reflective jackets that are reflective, Mr. Speaker, and mostly when you see them wearing, you are likely to encounter, when you are in Luanda, to encounter they are wearing reflector jacket that bears the image of Senator Otsotsi. So, Mr. Speaker, we must agree, how do we ensure that we implement this issue of reflector and the county transport, Mr. Speaker? On the issue of delivery motorcycles, I agree, Mr. Speaker, in clause number 19 is very critical because now with the Uber Eats, there is now Uber riders, the people delivery parcels within the city. It is a critical sector. What I just wanted to emphasize, and I know all my colleagues agree with me, the delivery riders, Mr. Speaker, are very critical. If you want to send something to Mombasa Road or even to somewhere in Thika Road, the easiest and faster way to deliver your parcel, especially within a short distance, is through border. And I think, in addition, and I've noted when they are issuing special license, especially Uber Eats, Mr. Speaker, because they deliver food, they must be public health, and I've agreed there is special licenses that are being given so that when they deliver food to, especially, I remember a few weeks, Mr. Speaker, when you were in session, after some dysfunctionality of the House, Mr. Speaker, some of us used to order food through Uber Eats. And you can imagine, Mr. Speaker, that if they are not complying in terms of public health, so we need also in these special licenses, we need to be precise. So it's because if a rider delivers to you food, and that food end up disturbing your stomach or makes you unwell, who do you all liable? Is it vicarious liability? What do you do? So we must look at those special licenses, Mr. Speaker. And it is very critical when they are doing that because they can deliver anywhere, Mr. Speaker, as I have indicated, going into the future. Mr. Speaker, in closing, because I have seen my time is up, I agree generally with the penalties that are there, but we must also be realistic in terms of penalties, Mr. Speaker, because most of these young people who are riders, they don't own those borders or motorcycles. They end up They carry, they are being hired. So I think in terms of penalty, we must also be reasonable. Because most of them are young. You can imagine if we convict them, they are young. You can hinder their chances, Mr. Speaker, of getting jobs in future, advancing in their careers, and many others, Mr. Speaker. Up and short, Mr. Speaker, I think this is a very good law. I want to encourage the border sector to take chance to give their opinion in terms of improving of this. This is a good start for this public transport sector, motorcycle. We need as a country to have a conversation around it, Mr. Speaker. As I said in the beginning of at the beginning of this year, we had, and therefore we ask the border as we push for their decency in terms of environment, they must also behave in terms of decency going into the future, avoid criminal aspects within the sector, so that we can ensure all of us, Mr. Speaker, have a public transport sector that goes into the future. And I hope the cabinet minister that will come in as the roads minister, Mr. Speaker, will ensure, Mr. Speaker, that the sector is well regulated. We don't want to see attention only to aviation sector and road sector. This also sector is very important, Mr. Speaker. And when a new minister will take over, and I want to believe the new one will be more listening and more sober, Mr. Speaker, is we want to see a more appropriate engagement with all sector players, regardless of who they are, Mr. Speaker, going into the future, Mr. Speaker. So with those very many remarks, Mr. Speaker, allow me to support this bill, and we will discuss about the three-wheel about tuk-tuk, so that we can, and the issue of mkokoteni and the rest, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with those very many remarks, I support. I thank you.
Senator Omtata.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for the opportunity to comment on this bill. And I also express my condolences again to my brother, Senator. And I would like to begin by recognizing that Boda originated in Busia. So this is a very important motion for the people of Busia. And I would request that Senator Halwale finds a way of having the state erect a memorial to the unknown first border rider. And the monument should be established or erected in Busia, where border came from. Number two, when you look at the industry, that a lot of people have gone into it, a lot of youngsters, and the main challenge for me is the training. Many border riders don't have licenses. I don't know if it's got riding licenses, driving licenses, but they don't have them. And I think given the impact of the absence of licenses on public health through injury and deaths, I would request that maybe as a public health measure, the state steps forward to underwrite or to subsidize the training of motorcycle riders across the country, so that poverty cannot be an excuse for not having a driving license or a riding license. And it would be not a waste of public funds, because the recovery in terms of prevention of what otherwise then becomes medical care or burial expenses for those who fall victim to the accidents would be much, much less than the money that would be required to equip and train these people to be efficient riders on the road. The other thing that this country needs to do very seriously is we need to get to the point whereby we realize that it's not only people who drive motor vehicles who pay taxes. And therefore, there is no justification for building roads only for people who drive motor vehicles. We must build roads for pedestrians and cyclists. The idea that border have to struggle and fight for space on roads used by four-wheeled vehicles is in itself not a good thing, and one of the reasons why many fatalities occur when you get motor vehicle versus motorcycle collisions. So I would urge that we need to come up with road designs and build roads for all taxpayers, those who cannot afford motor vehicles but walk on foot. You will see in Nairobi every morning when you go along Bagathi Way, and every evening, we have people who walk from Kibra, from Kawangware, going to industrial area. They don't have a place to walk. They have to keep on struggling on the edge of the road. Some get occasionally knocked down by motor vehicles. And this is something that needs to be addressed, that the road design must be inclusive. Our constitution, one of the national values of this country is inclusivity, under Article 10. Further, much as border border is important, we must wake up to the fact that Nairobi cannot continue being run by border border. Nairobi requires a proper public transport system. I've never gone to any country, any serious country where the capital city runs on border border like Nairobi. We need to get a proper public transport system in Nairobi. It's a strategic requirement. It cannot wait. Public transport is a key component of human resource. Our human resources need to be able to move freely and easily across. So we must not be waiting to modernize on motorcycles. That will be a stopgap measure, but going forward, our cities must be weaned off the need to rely on motorcycles and the like. I've got a small problem on Section 13, Clause 1D, which says every passenger on a two-wheeled motorcycle shall sit astride in the seat fixed behind the rider's seat. That statement has got cultural implications. In some areas, our sisters may not be comfortable sitting astride the motorcycle unless we are going to insist that they wear trousers. So we have to be sensitive to the dressing of women because they are women. we must be sensitive to that because it's a cultural issue that we cannot make a law that offends some cultures. Let us be sensible. Maybe we may find a better word for that. And even you can imagine in almost all situations, I don't see a situation unless a lady is wearing a trouser, to force her to sit astride on a motorcycle might demand her to expose more flesh than she's comfortable doing. So let us look at that. And just like you have done at 13.1b, 13.2b, where it says persons with disabilities will be exempted from the requirement
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Wow. And thank you, Dana. Thank you, Kid Rock, sometimes referred to as Bob. And thank you, Lee, right from the beginning. Thank you very much. What a talent. What a beautiful, beautiful song. Thank you. Friends, delegates, and fellow citizens, I stand before you this evening with a message of confidence, strength, and hope. 4 months from now, we will have an incredible victory, and we will begin the 4 greatest years in the history of our country. Together we will launch a new era of safety, prosperity, and freedom for citizens of every race,